Did you know that an adverse childhood experience can impact one's health and education for a lifetime? Research has shown that these early traumas can be a catalyst for arthritis, kidney disease, heart disease, lung disease, and even cancer. The very thought that events of one's childhood can affect them for the rest of their lives can be a bit scary, but there is hope and ways to open doors to change. In a book by Dr. Nadine Harris, who is a MD, she states the 10 different categories of this adverse childhood experience. They are emotional abuse, which is recurrent, physical abuse, which is recurrent, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, substance abuse within the household. That could be alcohol or anyone with a substance abuse problem. Mental illness in the household, living with someone who has suffered from depression or mental illness, or maybe even someone who has attempted suicide, having a mother treated violently, divorce or separation of parents, criminal behavior in the household, for instance, a household member going to prison. Now, this needs to happen before they have turned the age of 18. Supplemental categories were also identified. So here we go. One would be a community violence, homelessness, discrimination, being placed in foster care, bullying, repeated medical procedures or a life-threatening illness, death of a caregiver, loss of a caregiver due to deportation or migration. And then for those who are in the youth area or the youth ages, there's verbal or physical violence from a romantic partner and even youth incarceration. There is great impact upon children and even into adulthood because of the adverse childhood experiences. So when we look at that, we can see that there are a variety of diseases and conditions in children that are observed as early as infancy. And in babies, the exposure to these adverse childhood experiences is associated with growth delay, cognitive delay, and even sleep disruptions. For school-age children, they show higher rates of asthma and a poorer response to asthma rescue medications such as albuterol, greater rates of infection like viral infections, ear infections, and pneumonia, and even learning difficulties and behavioral problems. The adolescents also experience an adverse amount of symptoms associated with those very horrible children experiences, and they may exhibit higher rates of obesity, bullying, violence, smoking, teen pregnancy, teen paternity, and other very risky behaviors such as even sexual activity. However, when we look at this, we can see that there are findings which can help us out to deeper understand what's going on. So first, we've discovered that the ACEs, or those adverse childhood experiences, are astonishingly common. 67% of the entire population has at least one category of an ACE, with 12.6% had 4 or more categories. We've also found that a dose-response relationship between that ACE and that poor health outcome. This means that the higher that the ACE score, the greater the risk to his or her health. This means that the more of those adverse experiences that they've encountered, the greater the risk to the health. So for instance, if a person has 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, they're more than twice than likely to develop a heart disease and cancer, and 3.5 times as likely to develop chronic obstructive pulmonary disease as a person with 0. Now, there can be some early intervention, so there's hope. And the hope is that we're able to jump in and to help these children. So there are 2 different times in which these adverse situations can be helped. The first one is we want to look at a critical period. This is the time development when the presence or absence of this adverse experience results in those irreversible changes. And this is going to be something like the physical development of the brain, the eyes. Generally, after the age 8, we can see that there's some difficulty in even being able to have some having reversible changes. There's also the sensitive period. This is when the brain is particularly responsive to a stimulus in the environment, but unlike those critical periods, the window doesn't close at the end of the sensitive period. It just gets a lot smaller. So let's look at the antidote. What is the antidote for this problem? And there are things that we can do in order to help children and adults. First, we need to look at building a toolkit of interventions in order to really combat the effects of this toxic stress. So for instance, we want to look at sleep, the mental health of the individual, creating healthy relationships, exercise, nutrition, and even mindfulness. So there is evidence which proves when these things are used, these 6 things are used, that they are critical in the healing of the mind and the body. Of course, the best antidote of all is prevention, but let's be realistic. It may not always be possible at times. So for more information, I've included some links to a book by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris and also a link to a TED Talk. I think this is a very important information that we can get out there in order to save our children.